afternoon, everybody. I'm Sandy Valentine. I am a woman in long-term recovery, which for me means that I gave up drugs and illegal drugs, which I never used actually, to be full confessions, but alcohol on September 15th of 1991. And I am currently a health promotion manager at the University of Connecticut, where I lead our collegiate recovery program, which is called the Yukon Recovery Community. I also have the privilege of co-chairing Connecticut's Alcohol and Drug Policy Council Subcommittee on Recovery. And I have the pleasure and sometimes displeasure of co-hosting the Recovery Matters podcast with my husband, Phil Valentine. I'm so glad to see many of you, and I would love to see more. So if you have a webcam, would really love to have you turn on the camera, at least for a little bit, so we can see some faces before we get started. This is normally a 2-hour training program, and we're going to do it in an hour. And so that means we're going to move kind of fast. So, but we will try to make it as interactive as possible. And my new friend Frankie set the stage here in the chat by sharing her contact info as a way to network across all of us. And so I'd encourage you to do the same. One thing that I did learn recently is that it takes about a half an hour to do introductions if I do the training the way we normally do. So we won't go around the room necessarily today, but I would love for you to post in the chat the role that you're in and what led you to join us for today's session on Recovery Allies. A little background. I crafted this training 2.5 years ago, heavily influenced by the Recovery Coach Academy and with the permission of the Connecticut Community with Addiction Recovery, to bring recovery allyship to the University of Connecticut. Most colleges have a really strong understanding of allyship with certain identity groups. And so this was kind of a next layer to bring. And this has just been a tool that has allowed me to plant seeds in areas all over campus. We have 30,000 students across our 5 campuses and about 6,000 staff and faculty. And so having a tool that has allowed me to kind of penetrate across the pretty large demographic has been really powerful. And there's been very unexpected outcomes, things that I never would have envisioned happening just because we started the conversation. And so the investment has been returned tenfold to our collegiate recovery community here. So whether you're here to learn about being an ally or perhaps to learn about how an ally training program might help you in your endeavors, you are in the right place. Right. So I'm so glad you're here. Excuse me. So let's get started. You will see that we have the good pleasure of being part of the CCAR's International Association of Recovery Coach Professionals approved curriculum, so you can get credit towards your recovery coach professional designation by attending this training. We usually kick off with community agreements, and I'm getting a sense that all of you have been working in some way in the recovery community, so you'll be really familiar with these. In a longer program, we would take time to build a list ourselves, but you know, the bottom line is that we want to build a time together for the next 55 minutes where you feel comfortable sharing with one another, that you take the learning with you, but maybe not the name of the person unless they've given you permission to share their stories. If I ask you to share, it's perfectly okay to pass. Don't feel pressured. Simply just say that you want to pass. And some of these others you'll be really familiar with, right? But also be willing to be vulnerable about your beliefs and attitudes. We probably all got here down a different highway. And so sometimes we hear something new that we have to wrestle with a little bit. And definitely, I'm skipping over a lot of them, but definitely if something hits you and it feels like an ouch, it hit you negatively, let's talk about it. The more we understand those things across people of all different identities, the more we can do better in future sessions. So any others, any thoughts that you would want to add or questions about anything that you just saw? All right, I'm just going to move the chat over where I can see it. Thank you, guys. All right, so we have a plan for today, and it's a fast plan. So first thing is we want to be able to understand the complex nature of addiction as a disease, and that a person can't simply resolve that by choosing to stop. We're going to take a look at the myths and stigma about addiction and recovery, and how it negatively keeps folks from reaching out for help. We're going to talk about empathetic language and how we can effectively listen and honor others when they choose to share with you that they might be struggling with substance use or some other mental or behavioral health challenge. And that recovery is a lifetime journey. I shared with you that I've been in recovery for over 30 years, and I've, in the last 5 years, tackled 2 new areas of recovery that I didn't anticipate. And I've begun just recently to share openly about dealing with an anxiety disorder and dealing with an eating disorder that I've had pretty much my whole life. So it is a lifetime journey, and each layer that we uncover and walk through, in my experience, brings tremendous joy and blessings. And know the available recovery support services, resources. And I forgot to edit this, talked about campus, but we'll talk about resources that you can access in your areas. So first up is looking at addiction as a disease. And this is one of the definitions that came to us from the Surgeon General's report back in 2016. And that addiction to alcohol and drugs is chronic but treatable brain disease that requires medical intervention and not moral judgment. And I'm going to share one other with you. And this one comes from SAMHSA, and that is the definition of a substance use disorder. And for this one, Frankie, if I could put you on the spot, would you mind unmuting and reading this definition for us?
Substance use disorder, when the recurrent use of alcohol and or other drugs cause clinical and functional impairment, such as health problems, disability, and failure to meet major responsibilities at work, school, or home. Behavioral, physical, and social changes take place that have a negative impact on life.
So I don't know what your experience is with these 2 words of addiction and substance use disorder, and feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. But originally, substance use disorder really needed a clinical diagnosis. It came out in the DSM guide. And so typically a clinician, whether mental health or medical care, would diagnose you with this. But as we move more and more in the recovery movement to having recovery positive language, we see that folks are starting to self-identify as having a substance use disorder versus an addiction. But in my experience, we're still seeing both, and we're still seeing them used interchangeably. And so that's kind of how we are going to talk about it today, is that either phrase is perfectly fine to use, and that it really comes down to whoever you're trying to ally with, what makes them most comfortable. And we'll talk about treating them as a resource in a little bit. So I'm going to share with you a little video. I promise it's not long. It's 4 minutes, but it has been really powerful in sending a message about how the brain gets hijacked when they have a substance use disorder. So I'm going to ask Lila to put a note in the chat if everything's going well when I hit play, and that you're hearing and seeing it properly. So
in the 1950s, doctors Olds and Milner in laboratory studies of rats found the parts of the brain affected by addiction. But then in 1994, doctors Volkoff and Shelbert, top neuroscientists, ran PET scans of the brain that showed the effects of substance use disorders. And like other diseases, these scans showed it affected tissue function. So there are two main parts of the brain affected by drug use: the limbic system and the cortex. The limbic system, located deep within the brain, is responsible for our basic survival instincts. So when you do essential things to stay alive, like eat, drink, find shelter, build relationships, or care for your young, your brain reinforces behaviors that cause the release of dopamine from this region. That reward for surviving is also transmitted to the amygdala and hippocampus, which records a memory of that feeling, so we seek it again. This is our survival hardwiring. Addiction also affects this area, up here. That's the prefrontal cortex, which is what separates us from other animals. And this is where decision-making and impulse control live. When drugs or alcohol are used, they activate the very same dopamine process in the survival center. And when use is repeated, that substance can hijack that part of the brain. This hijacker changes the brain and weakens this system to make it believe that the primary need for survival is the drug. In hijacking the brain, it can usurp those primary motivations: food, water, shelter, relationships, and protecting our young. And the hijacker needs more and more of the substance to activate the same level of reward or feeling of pleasure, causing the brain tissue to become increasingly damaged with continued drug use. So why don't all people who use alcohol or drugs become addicted? There are factors that contribute to the development of a substance use disorder. They include individual factors like your genes, your age of exposure, and then environmental factors like drug availability. But there is good news. Addiction is preventable. Key factors that aid in preventing addiction can be categorized into two parts: risk factors and protective factors. Protective factors range from parental involvement, programs that improve self-control, limiting availability, and increasing attachment to your community. Another key element in preventing substance use disorders is to delay when use begins. Put simply, prevention is about delaying the onset of first use. In the adolescent brain, where brain tissue is more vulnerable, the hijacker is more prone to weaken the brain and plant itself as a disease. Those with substance use disorders commonly initiate first use much earlier, between 12 and 18 years old, which increases the likelihood of the hijacker taking hold. But if the hijacker does take hold, addiction is treatable. Advancements have been made in assessments, treatment programs, recovery supports, and medications to treat addiction. Brain scans show that once in recovery, the tissue in the limbic system and cortex can get better. With your help, we can expand these innovations to help millions of individuals and families and ensure that addiction is treated as the medical issue that it is. Together, we can solve this. Join us.
All right. So while I'm taking us back to our slide deck, does anybody have any thoughts to share? Was any of that new to you? Yeah, go ahead. Joanne, did you want to share?
There seems to be hope. Because right now I'm dealing with my husband, who had gone through withdrawal first time in his life. So this whole other side of the picture is very new to me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
You know, I think we've just, even for my own self, to understand how all that happened, right? Part of this is, yeah, that's great about prevention, but what if I'm already in it, right? What if I'm past that age? And I think just for us being able to share that video, and by the way, it's called Addiction in the Brain for Kids. The one for adults is exactly the same, but they give the hijacker an AK-47, and we just thought that was bad manners to use that version of the video. So it's the content is exactly the same for adults, but it really, especially because we're introducing this to students who don't have a lot of background in this as well, it really kind of opens their mind to understanding some of the things that may be out of control for them, that they didn't realize that they were blaming themselves, they were blaming their character, they're a bad person, all of that. So feel free to just Google addiction in the brain and you will get that video, and you might want to share it with a loved one. who doesn't quite understand what's happening. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on? So thumbs up if you agree that addiction is a disease. We're all good. And so let's start looking at the myths and stigma that keep people from sharing with us or approaching us for help. It's going to be very familiar to some of you, but what are some of the symptoms that you might see if a person has cancer? And you can put them in the chat or shout them out. I'm comfortable either way.
Physical changes,
Yeah. Yep.
changes in eating, sleep. Yeah.
They might lose their hair,
Yeah.
weight loss, lack of energy. Perfect. Thank you guys. Thank you, John and Frankie, for posting in the chat. And so, you know, I can speak firsthand because I've had a number of loved ones in my life navigate a cancer diagnosis, including my husband who had stage 4 cancer. And we received from our community a lot of casseroles. There were nights that we had 3 casseroles lined up for the same meal. Maybe that's where my eating disorder started, but no, it was long pre-existing. So, but anyway, that's typically what we were met with, tons and tons of casseroles. That's what people did when they found out that our loved one had a cancer diagnosis. How about if somebody's diagnosed with heart disease? What might you see?
Stroke.
Stroke, chest pain, shortness of breath might be some of the symptoms you see, swelling, pain. And then if you have heart disease, you probably don't want to send that family or that person in the hospital a casserole, but you might send them flowers, right? And then we have our loved one who's been diagnosed with an addiction or a mental or behavioral health disorder. And what are some of the symptoms you might see with someone with that diagnosis?
Chaos.
Chaos. That's a good one. I think I'm going to have to add that. But they might be, actually, this sounds like me on a bad day without the stealing and lying. Moody, irritable, irrational, withdrawn, lying, stealing. So it's really hard to look at the symptoms of this disease when you think about what the symptoms look like in these other diseases. And what typically happens if somebody's loved one goes off to treatment? What does the community or the neighbors do for that person? What's their reaction?
They don't
don't know
usually
it.
even know.
Elise, is that your
Silence.
silence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? People don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Disgust. Yeah. You know, or finally, but if they're not going off to treatment and they're just behaving in these symptoms, there is a lot of negative reaction. And one of the things I think about a lot was I was watching a video on social media, but it was actually some kind of an acquaintance, and they were just sharing a story. And all they said was, oh my God, that person has an addiction. Now, if you were to see the words in type, not a problem, right? Oh my God, somebody has an addiction. But the tone in this person's voice, I could just like feel the stigma coming up in me by hearing that tone. And I think what's so important is as we think about this and think about that addiction, mental, behavioral health disorders are all diseases. And the fact that we don't treat it like one is it's not how we're treating that person at the moment they come to you saying they're struggling. It's that you may never get that opportunity based on how you've been talking about others in these situations. If you've been saying about somebody who's clearly exhibiting some mental health challenges, like they're a fruitcake, they're a nut, like, you know, that language then will come back and prevent that person from ever approaching you. So often we think of it in the moment of time, like, gosh, if my friend came to me and needed help, I would absolutely help them. Without a doubt, most people would. Most people would absolutely help somebody who is struggling, but they're never going to approach you based on their experience of you. And I think that's the hardest thing to figure out. So we're going to do a little exercise. Some of you that have been through the Recovery Coach Academy might resonate with this exercise done in a different way. But you can either open a new tab on your browser and go to this website, or you can use your phone, which is probably easier, and text Yukon Shaw to 37607. So I'm going to give you just a brief minute and you'll have a second chance to see the info when I switch slides on you. Not to worry, it's coming right back. So hopefully you can see that at the top of your screen. Give me a thumbs up, a few of you, if you're there. So we're going to do this exercise. And again, if you've gone to the RCA, this will feel familiar. But what I'd like you to do is type words into that, type either text or in the chat.
For goodness sake, well, I was, but not like here now. I was over on the other. Just
Whatever.
go hang out with Marissa and Nancy for a few
Okay.
minutes. Kick it
And
off for a
Marie,
couple
I
minutes.
don't know, but you're unmuted.
Have you guys? Yeah. Okay. Oh, and
Okay. Are we good? Is everybody there? All right. So what I'd like you to, I'm sorry, Joanne. You're good. Okay. What I'd like you to do is when you think of people with an alcohol or drug addiction, don't filter yourself, positive, negative, or neutral. What are the words that come to mind? And send each word off separately. We're going to build a picture today. I am so messy, guys. I love that that came up first. We'll give this a few more seconds, but it's always really interesting. We've trained about 500 people with this training over the last 2 years, and every group has a different flavor. I will tell you, when I did this with 20 nurses here at UConn, they were very loving and kind words. And so I can tell by looking at this that we have some people in recovery in the group other than me, because we have experienced the language. So really powerful what you're sharing. So if you want to enter one more word, I just want you to, we're just going to reflect for just a minute on what you're seeing, and welcome New Haven to the session. Would anybody be willing to share what they see as they look at this word cloud?
It's just really sad. It makes my heart heavy and sad.
Thank you.
Everything's negative.
Yep, everything's negative. So we're going to do this again together. And I just realized I added a little extra in the chat, but I'm putting the link. If you didn't have a chance, you're going to have a chance to join us on this next one. And by the way, if you haven't done word clouds before, the larger the word, that means more people have entered that word. And so the loudest word that I see here is broken. All right. Let's do another one. This time we're going to do people with a mental health issue. I got to understand what bus rider means. So post it in the chat if we can help me with that one. I guess I haven't been on a bus in a while. Wow. So powerful as we see certain words become bigger. Anybody want to share their thoughts as they look at this word cloud? Out of touch. Thank you, Frankie. All right. We're going to bring this one to a close. I'm going to pick on Khalees because I haven't seen her in a while. What's this slide make you think, Khalees, when you look at this?
I think that, like, you know, because we do this activities a lot, and it's always hard. Like, I don't think, you know, sometimes whenever you do stuff over and over again, it gets easier, but I don't think that this is something that gets easier. And I just, you know, and then to hear like how many times we have these conversations, to see that it's still happening. You know, how many years have we been doing this and it's still happening? And I think that it just irks my nerves a little bit too. And it's just heartbreaking.
If it's encouraging at all, we initially started doing this with just student classes, and they didn't have a lot of these words. And it was really refreshing to me that 18 to 22-year-olds weren't using words like junkie and druggy. And I explored that with them because having done the Recovery Coach Academy, I was so used to seeing really harsh words, and they were really struggling to come up with harsh words. So I'm hoping that's a sign of progression.
That honestly makes my heart so happy to hear. Like, that is so amazing.
Yeah, and it's been consistent over the 2-year experience when we have mostly students. Neetha, did you have a question or contribution?
So can you just tell me what some of the words you are seeing from young people are that made you smile like that when you said that to us? Because
well, they might say weak. They might say, and I actually have some of the flip charts from back then. They might say sick, or they might, you know, they might say addict, but they just didn't use the harsh words. Loser is about as harsh as we would see. So it's really interesting. And this includes, I did a group of 75 male fraternity brothers. Like, so, okay, I kind of would have thought maybe there'd be a little of that there. But let's get to the good one. One more, guys, and then we'll get back onto the content. But let's do the fun one. What do you think about when you think about people in recovery? Oh, this is always my favorite. And we've got some words coming in the chat for folks who weren't able to get into the poll everywhere. So thank you for participating that way. Love, hope, healing. So since I did go ahead and share about student perception, I will tell you that this one would end up being the most negative because the most powerful word would be boring. So it's great to know from where you're starting, right? And it's great to understand the perception of what a life in recovery is, which for me has been anything but boring. And so we're able to have that conversation. But again, so interesting based on the dynamic of the group. And anybody else want to share their observations about people in recovery? Yeah, go ahead, Khalees.
Well, I just wanted to say, like, whenever we do this activity, like, it's actually really sad, but it's mainly negative words. When we do this activity, it is mainly negative words. And you would think that, we like, this is really positive, it's like hope, loving, resilience and stuff, but something we constantly see when we do this stuff like this is negative words for recovery. And I think that, I don't know, anything you just mentioned too, like with the young people, like boring, like that's something we see all the time, like never will be trusted, you can't trust them with a stick or things like that. And it's like, once you can't change your leopard spots, and so like watch your back. And I just think that like kind of, even though people are doing well and like trying to better themselves, we still, it's like Phil says, we will trust you until you give us a reason not to trust you. And like, we can love them, we can cherish the work that they're doing. And so I feel like somebody said in the comments, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. But look what a great group of people showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. So thank you guys so much for participating with that. And okay, so this gets back to talking about the power of labels, right? When we start to label people. And I do want to just look at the chat here because Jessica shared that most of us familiar in this substance use disorder field, the way we think about it, positive, because that's the goal we're aiming for, right? And I honestly, and I'm sure most of you who are working in the areas of recovery, I feel like our world just continues to become more hurting, whether you have a mental health disorder or a substance use disorder, and that the recovery tools and practices really, to me, would be a goal for every human. Because I think there's something when we step into the world that we need to recover from immediately, but that's just a personal bias. There's no evidence behind that. So let's talk about the power of labels. They can empower or disempower, humanize or objectify, engender compassion or fear and hatred, motivate or deflate, comfort or wound, and unite or create enmity, and that the stigma is a mark of shame or discredit. And so there's a favorite recovery leader of mine who really doesn't like to use the word stigma too much. And so I'm always tempering my own use of it. And it really has caused me to always flip. We spend a lot of time talking about what you shouldn't do, but we very rarely talk about what you can do. So we're going to talk about some of the language and how to listen, because these are things we can do. These are ways we can promote recovery instead of always thinking about how we're going to stomp the stigma. When we want to get rid of something, we have to replace it with something. The same way when we get rid of drugs and alcohol in our life, for those of us that are in recovery, we need to find something in replacement of it because we were using drugs and alcohol for a reason. So we're going to talk about words to abandon and words to use. And this is a short list. You know, there's a lot of work being done around the country. My favorite resource, and Lila, I'm going to ask you to enter it in, is the chat for folks, but the Recovery Research Institute, which is a partnership between Harvard and Mass General. And Dr. John Kelly leads that and is doing an amazing amount of work there that's very real and able to articulate it into action. But they're doing more and more work around words and word choices. So can I have a volunteer who, as I put these up on the board, will read them out loud for the group? Go ahead, Khalees. So we want to abandon.
You want me to go?
Yep.
Okay, we want to abandon substance abuse,
And we want to use.
substance misuse,
We want to abandon
clean,
and use.
sober, or substance free.
Right. And so what's the reason why we want to get rid of these two? Anybody want to share? Why do we want to get rid of substance abuse? I see New Haven has their hand up.
Because hi everybody, it's Rita, all my UK friends over there, Sandy, my favorite person, one of my favorite people in the whole world. Well, both to me, abuse implies that as Phil once told me, I never abused my drugs at all. My drugs may have abused me, but I never abused them. But as well as abuse and clean indicates dirty. You know, I'm dirty if I use. They're both derogatory, and abuse to me implies that I chose to be abusive. It's a negative connotation. If I believe addiction is a disease, then abuse is not the right word, because it sounds culpable to me. It is how it sounds to me.
Because what it is aligned with, it aligns with child abuse, domestic violence abuse, or domestic abuser. It aligns with all those things, sexual abuse, and those are not the same. And thank you for sharing clean and dirty. So back to my partnership with my new co-host, Khalees. We want to get rid of
Addict,
and
disorder,
yeah, so person with a substance use disorder. And some of you may have heard there's just a growing trend across the nation about using what's referred to as person first language, that we are a human before we are our identity. And we want to abandon
ex-addict, and person living in recovery. Battling
away
with an
from battling.
addiction, and person living with an addiction. Right. Medication is a crutch, and medication is a treatment tool. Oh, I've never heard that one before. I like that. Addict, junkie, and druggie, and person using alcohol or illicit drugs.
You know, I'm going to pause here. This is an interesting one. Right now, any college campus in the United States that receives federal money, using cannabis is illegal on our campus, but it is not illegal in the state of Connecticut. So literally a student can walk a block and it's an illicit drug, or they can be on campus. No, it can be a legal drug a block away in what we refer to as downtown stores, Connecticut, but on campus, it's illegal. So that one is a really tricky one, but the whole idea is that nobody is telling anybody they shouldn't use prescribed medication as prescribed. Oops, I got so excited I lost my way. All right, I'm going to just finish up here. We want to abandon relapse prevention and talk about protecting our recovery, or recovery protection, and move away from relapse. And we've started being really good here, but it's taken a long time, to talking about return to use, which really lets me help me work with students from a harm reduction perspective when we talk about the fact that and I have one particular student who has shared her story in past training, so I have her permission. But she has returned to use quite often in this process. But we talk about the fact that every time that she's returned to use, she hasn't lost everything she's learned in recovery. She hasn't gone back to baseline of where she was before she initiated her recovery for the first time. What she has figured out is that her recovery plan needs to be tweaked, and we need to figure something else out. But one of the foundational values that I have working with students in recovery is to never create a door of shame that they can't come back to us. And, you know, I personally have had issues with shame throughout my life, and I spent 2021 kicking it to the curb almost completely successfully, but not quite. And I just think that when we lay down this stigma about you relapsed or, you know, you broke the rules, that we don't create a way for them to know they can come back. Where are they going to get help if they can't come to us? So that's kind of one of our values here. And it doesn't work for everybody. And there are other collegiate recovery programs that have chosen to use a model of you must be sober and be practicing abstinence-based recovery for 6 months before you can even connect with the resources. So it's not one size fits all, but this is what we've evolved to doing here. Any thoughts or questions on any of these word choices or any others you want to add in the chat? Feel free.
I really love that word, recovery protection. I just think, especially where we are, you know, working, I'm constantly battling that when people talk about relapse prevention, and I'm just like, there's got to be better words, and you have just gifted me that today, so thank you so much.
I stole it wherever I got it from, Neetha, but you're welcome to it.
I'm stealing it from you today, hon.
And it also gives language to folks to share with others when they get pressured to do things that aren't good for them. And it doesn't necessarily mean using. It could mean being in an environment that's not a healthy environment for them, to be able to say, you know what, I've really got to protect my recovery. Khalees?
Hello?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Hartford.
Oh, what I was thinking was, you know, I always wondered why we would use the word relapse and forgot there's another word is lapse. And there's a difference between a lapse and a relapse. But we will automatically go to a relapse when a person is really just having a lapse. And when you look at the two, it's such a great difference. But traditionally, we just run to the word relapse, which makes it seem so terrible. Oh, I relapsed today. You never heard somebody say they relapsed, and it was like, all right, I just had a slip and fall, and I was okay. But if they knew about a lapse, and that which is a slip and fall, and there's a difference between the two, why really never was ever used the word lapse?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Thank you for that. Khalees, you had your hand up?
I was just gonna say, like, I can't remember where I heard it, but somebody used the word activate, like, that, oh, that really activated, you know, or maybe I got reactivated or something. And I was doing a video for this organization, and they were like, we want to put this might be a trigger warning to some people, you know, and I just emailed her back and I said, you know, but if you're telling people they're going to get a trigger warning, they might get a trigger. So why don't we say this might activate some feelings for you? You know, please reach out to your support network. And just, you know, that was an email. That was just a little thing. And she was like, I never thought about that. But if I'm telling people that they're going to get triggered, they're probably going to get triggered.
Yeah.
And I think that just even like those little things we can do make such a bigger impact. Because she's like, I've never used the word trigger again. Like, she was like, I don't use it anymore.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. All right, I'm going to hustle now because I just saw the time. I'm pretty sure you guys are all really good at this, so I'll go through it quickly. But active listening. So you've got the right words, but we're going to ask you to pause for a minute and be a good listener. And so that really means focusing in on the speaker. One of the things I've been trying to do today is to look directly in the webcam whenever I can. So you know that I'm paying attention to you. Unfortunately, that means I'm not looking at your face, which is a little lower, but you know, focusing in when you're in person with folks, or even if you are in a virtual setting, trying to eyeball that webcam now and then to give folks that comfort that you're really paying attention. show that you're listening with your body language. I'm going to send a message to somebody on the call today. You know, put your phone down, turn it over, don't pay attention to the phone for a minute. Allow the speaker to finish without interruption. So particularly in this setting that I work in with young people, I talk about this a lot. I am not a patient person. I've been in recovery for so long. Like, you ask me, how are you? I might give you a 15-minute version like that, even if I just met you, right? So, but that is not normal behavior in 2022. And young people in particular have a hard time sharing. And so you might just have to sit for a while and let them get the words out and let that come out longer than what might feel comfortable to you. And I've experienced this again and again as a person who spent the first 30 years of her career trying to use the least amount of words possible and to get things done really quickly. That can be a struggle. Ask clarifying questions. Sometimes we've got some messaging, especially with a loved one, like there's a whole thing going on in your head when somebody's finally talking to you that you care about and you think they might be seeing the light, that we might be converting what they're saying into a different message than the one that they're trying to convey. So being able to reflect back and say, so are you telling me that you think you might be ready for treatment, or you just want to talk to a resource and see what the options are? Just reflecting back what you're hearing to make sure that you've got it, but also so that they know that you've got it. And then summarizing what you've heard, which is kind of what I did. All right, I just flipped that. I would have asked a question, but I didn't. And then because I'm super cheesy, listen in silent, have the same letters. Many of you have seen this before, but kind of powerful to think about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we treat the individual who might be reaching out to us. And so this first picture is an example of perhaps if I think about a student here at UConn is the blonde facing us, and these are two faculty or staff members. Maybe it's the dean's office trying to figure out how they're going to handle this student. And you can see that she's not a part of the conversation at all. And so that probably means that we're treating that student as an object. This is my preferred style whenever I can get away with it. So this is a situation where it's more of a two-way communication, but I have something that I want the person to do, right? So the person who's approaching me for help, I know I have the answer. And in this situation, I'm just going to manipulate the conversation till they think my idea is their idea. And that's really when we're treating somebody as a recipient, that we have the brilliance, we know what they should do, and we're just going to get them to our answer. So I've been working on that, guys, but normally back, I was a salesperson for many years. Like that was my whole jam, right? Was to get the customer to buy what I've got. But what I have learned works the best is when we have a two-way dialogue, when the answers really come from the person that we're working with, the person that we want to ally with. And we've heard time and time again that most folks do know when they're being treated like a resource, when they're really in the conversation and they're really listened to. And one thing I would say about this, because I've had this happen a lot, we've really grown this year. We have about 30 regular attenders who are either undergrads, grads, or doctoral students. And for some of our younger students that have come in their first or second year, and they might be 18 or 19 years old, they often have no idea what they should do. But I always make sure I ask permission. So after we've given them a chance to be the resource and we're not really moving along, and you kind of get that sense that they really want you to give them an idea, I will always ask permission first. And I will say, would you like me to make a suggestion for you on what I think might be helpful for you to do? And that goes over really well. So I do think there are times when you do need to bring that to the table when they don't know. Fair? All right. So in case you didn't get to the end answer, we want to treat the person, the recovery allies and recovery coaches treat the recovery as a resource. So we have a quick scenario here that I think we have time for, and has been a really interesting scenario we've used at UConn. So he said I wouldn't call on him, but I'm going to call on Phil to read this out loud for us. We'll see if he's still paying attention.
You're calling on me?
Yeah, just to read.
Okay. Your close friend is in recovery, just got out of rehab, 2 months sober. You have tickets to a sports game and invite him. As you walk in and pass the beer stand, he says, "You can get a beer. It won't bother me. I'm totally good." If he wasn't with you, you probably would have a couple. What do you do today?
So anybody other than Phil, what would you do? Come on, we've got folks in the recovery centers. I know you know I know you know an answer. There's no right answer.
Mhm.
Come on, Hartford. I see you wanting to unmute.
Well, if you was to ask me, you said he just got out. So just because the person just got out, I would not get the beer. Because he's too fresh to be testing the waters already.
Yeah.
I definitely would not get the beer at all, even if they said it was okay. For the simple fact that right now, as they say, he is the most, or she is the most important person in the room. So I have to put them before myself.
Yeah. I think it's important to just go with your gut in these situations, but that was totally my answer. Like if I had to answer this scenario, I would have given the same answer. And it was interesting. The very first time we ever delivered this training, one of the students raised his hand and said, because about 5 people gave a similar answer. And he raised his hand and said, "But you just told me we should treat them like a resource. And if I'm treating them like a resource and they say that they're good, shouldn't I believe them?" And I was like, oh, right. So I still don't know if there's a right answer. I think you need to be intuitive to it. But it really was an interesting perspective. And I kind of got my words thrown right back at me in the first 5 minutes after we went over the last topic. So it's always good. They're listening. All right, so we are going to accelerate. So looking at recovery as a lifetime journey, and there are multiple pathways. And I'm going to skip this. And just if you're not familiar with the definition of recovery, it's interesting that SAMHSA, which is our federal governing body around things, substance abuse and mental health, they, by the way, it's in the president's some kind of bill to change their name and get rid of the word abuse. And that's a petition that went out from the recovery community. So cheers for that. Hopefully it'll get voted on. But they've been calling this all of a sudden it's the working definition of recovery. And I think that there's been so much debate about what recovery really is. But I think this is a great one, a great definition. It's a process of change with which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And I'm pretty sure people are fighting over the word potential. It's different for all of us, but that's kind of the definition we work under. And you can see nowhere in there does it talk about drugs or alcohol. So just as an aside, we adopted CCAR's definition here at UConn, and that you're in recovery when you say you are. Treating students as a resource, there really was no other definition we could use. And so let's take a look at some of the support services. I'm sharing UConn's website just in case any of you who might be in Connecticut that end up connecting with families. I will try to type it in the chat. So it's student health. Oh my God. At UConn. Health. .ucon.edu. I can do this, guys. I can. There we go. Feel free to check out our page and see everything. Thanks for the encouragement, please. But we have a lot of listings there. And then Drug CT Connecticut is also a great resource. Even if you're not in Connecticut, there's access to all kinds of things. All right, I'm gonna let somebody else type that one in because now I'm like pressured to finish. But one of the things we say here is there is no wrong door. And this is just a sampling. So if you're brand new to being a recovery ally, these are some of the tools that somebody might want to pursue. So, you know, a lot has made it over the years. I think we're heading towards 100 years in existence is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, both of which are higher power based. And sometimes people aren't into higher power based. So gratis of work done in the United Kingdom. We have Smart Recovery. That is a growing pathway of recovery here in the United States. It uses cognitive behavioral techniques. It's a very different model, but it's more science-based. And for those folks who really are not interested in a higher power-based pathway of recovery, it can be a great option. And there are meetings online and in person all around the United States. And I put CCAR here in the middle because CCAR has tremendous amount of resources on their site, ccar.us. Y12SR is yoga for 12-step recovery. We've had the privilege of hosting recovery yoga here at UConn for the last 2 years, and we're going to continue to host it. And what it really does is it kind of checks in with the group. The group comes in, are they experiencing a lot of anxiety? Can you sense that in the group that night? Then you practice a relaxation form of yoga. If everybody's coming in feeling really good, you might practice a different kind of yoga. And if you think I'm not a yoga participant, you are right, because there are technical words associated with those practices, and I don't know what they are. But anyway, it's been really cool, and it has actually brought us a whole host of students who have eating disorders and have been looking for the kind of support that the recovery community can provide. intherooms.com is a great resource because you can get access to a meeting and try it out in the privacy of your home, your dorm room, your car, anywhere. And it really allows somebody who isn't so sure a recovery meeting is right for them to explore it. And then the last story I share is Celebrate Recovery. That is a Christian-based recovery program held around the United States. But this is just a smidgen of everything that's available. And Khalees, I will get you the right website for that. But there are so many pathways. And the thing that I've learned hanging out with some folks that have been in recovery even longer is that we kind of create our own tapestry of those components, what it might look like for you. It could be a Bible study in your church, plus a therapist, plus time in nature. It could be 12-step, but then an all recovery meeting at a CCAR recovery center. So there's so many ways we create it, and it can evolve over the lifetime of our recovery journey. Any questions on that? Oh, 1 minute. Okay, if you have questions, post them in the chat. I will make sure I answer them before I leave. Gonna fly through this, but there are different roles in this whole recovery world. A therapist really allows you to unpack past life trauma. It's a therapeutic process that you go through. Anytime a student tells me that they want to look at trauma that they experienced previously, we start to connect them with a therapist. A 12-step sponsor might treat somebody more like an object, but that might be just what they need to initiate their recovery. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's somebody who's been farther along that pathway of recovery and can be a great guide. A recovery coach, we're trying to walk alongside folks in their pathway. And one of the biggest things that I do here at UConn is the resource broker connection. Having warm handoffs to our friends at CCAR has been invaluable. And CCAR has referred students to me. And when a student knows that there's this connection, they're more likely to enter the doors of what we have to offer. And then we're looking for all of you to do, if you're not already, and I know many of you are, is to be the ally, a friend, a supporter, a helper, a partner, an advocate. even if you don't ever encounter somebody who needs direct support from you, the recovery community needs the support. So taking a look at your process and your practices wherever you work or live or your community can be life-changing for others that you may never know, but I can promise you it's happening. Okay, warm handoffs, I talked about a little bit. Number one, most winning capability is to say, for me to be able to say to a student, you know, would you like to get connected with a therapist over in the counseling center? Yes. Would you like me to walk you over? You would? Yes. And I walk them over and I get them connected. It's huge in having a successful outcome. So creating a network of folks in your life in recovery in this larger recovery community. I know that I have a familial relationship with CCAR, but I have to tell you, when I started this work knowing nothing 3.5 years ago, CCAR showed up, and they showed up recently for a big event I held here. And that's my experience with the recovery community. It's not just the boss, it's so many of them that are on this call today just showed up to support whatever I was doing and to make things go better for our students here. So understand it's a disease, speak the language of recovery, treat people as a resource, listen actively, support multiple pathways of recovery, know the resources, and provide a warm handoff. That's what we're asking allies to do. And so this is what we're asking you to do. And if you're in, raise any kind of hand you want, your regular hand, your virtual hand. We'd love to see that. And I know this is the end of our time together, but I'm happy to hang out if anybody has questions or wants to share. Thank you so much. I'm sorry it was so fast.